Welcome. I think you see what our conversation is about this evening. I first met Rafael and his partner, Dorian, when I was giving a lecture at the University of Sydney and participating in a conference on, I think it was the Global Mindfulness Forum. And I had the pleasure of going over to the University of Sydney and being in conversation with a monk, I think, about compassion. And that's always talking about compassion from a Buddhist perspective versus a neuroscience perspective. How many people have come to our events in the past? Oh, wow, that's great. How many came just because of the topic? Okay. It's a fascinating topic, isn't it? So for all of those, the small minority who are just here for whatever reason, they need a warm place to sit for an hour or two. And that's not a bad thing. My name is Jim Doty. I'm the founder and director of the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education. One of my personal interests and the mission of our center is to really understand from a neuroscience psychology perspective those aspects of compassion and also the peripheral physiologic effects of such behaviors. And what we know is that this improves health, wellness, and longevity, and also ultimately gives meaning to one individual's lives. As we are ever more frequently inundated with technology, of which we were never meant to be engaged, nor did our evolution, if you believe in evolution. How many people believe in evolution? Well, if we're in Alabama, none of you would. I shouldn't say that. There may be some Alabamians here. I apologize. But our evolution was never meant for us to be so distracted by incoming information, and as a result of that, it keeps us constantly aroused and, frankly, not connected, but oftentimes more disconnected. It doesn't necessarily bring us closer. You know, having 1,000 Facebook friends doesn't mean you have a single friend or somebody you can turn to when you're in need. One of the areas of interest that has come forth because of this explosion of technology and all of our connection to technology is how do we create technology that, if you will, is compassionate and also is thoughtfully designed so that, in fact, there is a positive engagement versus one that potentially creates more stress and less connection. And that's really the focus of this conversation today. Rafael has a PhD, if I recall correctly, in artificial intelligence. He runs the Positive Computing Lab. Dorian directs the creative aspects of that lab and probably actually gives him lots of advice which he has to take, because if he doesn't, when he gets home, he'll have to take it there. Or I think of this right now because my wife's mad at me because I haven't been home for a couple of days. And I'm going to be getting some advice shortly. But anyway, without further ado, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. One of the things I did want to mention is that coming out in MIT Press is a book by our esteemed speaker and speakers, perhaps, on positive computing and its effect on, I think, health and wellness. And he's also the author of the Oxford Handbook on, is it Affective computing? Yeah. So I would suggest you really look at those. Is the MIT book out yet? Oh, do I have a copy? No. All right. Actually, the only reason I invite these people is to get free books. I could care less. All right. So for those of you who have not seen this book, I'm beginning to feel like Dr. Oz, except for this actually has value. Anyway, without further ado, my friends and colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jim, for that really kind, very special introduction. So, yes, as you were saying, I'm from the University of Sydney. The university has about 50,000 students, about 7,000 staff. And Sydney itself, it has a very close relationship with the beaches, the natural beauties across Australia. It is maybe best known for sports and some of the iconic buildings like the Opera House there that was finished in 1973. Now back then, in the 70s, most people were foreign to digital experiences. And those who had it normally had it within the context of the workplace. In the 1980s, digital technology started getting into our homes through PCs and gaming consoles. And then in the 90s, those clunky mobile phones started becoming smaller and cooler and more common and more into our everyday life. And then they were able to do much more than just making phone calls. And in just the last 5 years, digital devices have got into every aspect of our life. They are part of the moment-by-moment lived experience. Now, one critical question remains. Are we any happier? Is all this effort, all this investment that you guys make here in Silicon Valley, all the carbon emissions, all of that having an impact on overall well-being? Well, incredibly not. So according to surveys over the last 5 decades, wealth has tripled and quadrupled in some countries, and therefore also digital technologies, yet well-being has hardly changed. Now, I'm an engineer. I teach engineers. And as an engineer, I have to ask myself, if technologies are being developed to improve people's lives, why is the correlation between well-being and technology so low? So I think it's because over the last 3 decades, we have been designing for very, very sensible things like productivity, efficiency, accuracy, speed, and so on. And only in the last 5 years or so, we have also been designing for satisfaction, pleasure, desire. Now, these are proxies. These are proxies that reflect something that I would call the tyranny of productivity, that is making all the more difficult to pause, to disconnect, to pay attention to quality over quantity, to take the time to be compassionate, altruistic, to help others. Now, we have been focusing on these proxies when we could also, or we should be focusing on what really matters. So the question that we want to bring here today is why can't we design for the thing that really matters? So this is what we call positive computing. If we want to improve worldwide well-being, we should be designing for well-being directly. In fact, we believe that all technologies should be designed to support psychological well-being and flourishing. And this is what we call positive computing, the research and development of technology to support well-being. Now, when I give this talk to my engineering colleagues, normally they come and ask me, well, is this something that can be studied scientifically? Can well-being be measured? Now, I'm not sure how many of you are psychologists or behavioral economists, but psychologists and behavioral economists have been developing many, many different measures that can be used for this. Now, before I get into that, I want to tell you a little bit about how technology is changing us. And then I will tell you about the multidisciplinary foundations that we can use to better understand and to improve the measures that we have for well-being. And to conclude, I will tell you a little bit about some of our projects. Actually, that will be Dorian's part. So technology our brains are really adapting to technology. And there's plenty of evidence that technology is changing the way we remember, the way we relate to each other, and even the way we understand ourselves. Now, the relationship It's very complex. And I think one of the best areas to understand the complexity is around social network platforms. So I have selected here some of the papers so you get some idea. Now these papers have suggested, or some of these, that well-being, there's a decline in subjective well-being when people use social networking platforms. Sometimes they suggest that there's an increase in well-being. Other studies have focused on emotional contagion, how emotions propagate through social networks. I think some of the more nuanced studies, like the one by people at Facebook, show that really depends on what people is doing on the network. The type of activities you engage on will have a different impact. Now, technologies are also providing us new ways to measure the impact they have on well-being. So this one, a wandering mind is an unhappy mind, is an interesting paper that shows this using experience sampling techniques on a mobile phone. And what they did is ask about 5,000 people 3 questions. What are you doing? What are you focusing, or what are you thinking about, and how do you feel? And what they found is that roughly half of the people were thinking about something else that they were doing. So I can see here, or I imagine here, statistically, half of you will be thinking about something else besides this seminar. But the second interesting thing is that it doesn't really depend on the quality of the seminar. It's not like sometimes you will assume that the quality of the experience makes your mind wander. So even if the experience is very positive, your mind will be wandering. In fact, even making love, people are thinking about something else like up to 30% of the time.
Just personal experience.
So they asked people, and I don't know what they were thinking about, but they didn't ask about that. But 30% of the time, they were thinking about something else. The third very, very interesting result is that when your mind wanders, you're less likely to be happy. And this happens in all type of activities, in every type of activity. Now, if you thought 5,000 people is a very good number, imagine the type of reach that companies like Facebook can have. So in that other study, it has 61 million participants. And they show different user interfaces, and they show that different interfaces will have an impact on people's behavior. In that study was information seeking and voting behavior. Now, there are many new technologies that we can use to understand people's experiences. I have personally worked on what we call cognitive computing, that is understanding what people are thinking. And we have done this in the context of learning technologies that look into the writing of people. One of the interesting things about studying writing is that when you're writing, it's very hard for you to think about something else. I know that if you're writing something, that's what you're thinking about. So what we've done is generate visualizations and summaries and other functionalities that give feedback to people so they can reflect on their thoughts. Now, feedback is one of the best things that we can do to help people. But it's very challenging to know what the impact of the feedback is and what is the best feedback we can give. So we have been working on what is called behavioral analytics, and we have built tools and visualizations like this one. In this one, different rows are different writers. And each of these green balls you see here is a writing session. So when a person has only one ball, it means that he didn't spend too much time writing. If there are many balls, it's because the person went many times and spent a lot of time writing. And then what we do is we give them feedback of different types. So this person received the red triangle is reflective feedback. So we tell the person what is wrong about the wrote, but we don't tell them how to fix it. The blue square is directive feedback. This is we tell the person what is wrong about the essay and how to fix it. And we can see how many times the person read the feedback, how often, if they change something, if they address the feedback or not, how much time they spend addressing the feedback. So we can measure the impact of feedback on people. The third thing that we can do is understanding people's emotions. And this is a research area called affective computing. And this is the other book that you were mentioning. I was very impressed that you could remember the title. So it's the Oxford Handbook of Affective Computing. And there are many ways that we can now measure or understand people's emotions. In this one, we use computer vision. So the writer is in front of the webcam, and we can detect automatically what the person is feeling just from facial expressions. And we can use this for many purposes. In learning technologies, it has become quite common. And we are working with doctors in a hospital to try to improve communication skills by medical students on telehealth systems. So doctors are already receiving training on how to interact face-to-face. So how to bring bad news, how to bring good news, how to let the other person speak, and so on. But they don't yet receive training on telehealth systems. Here, the people are interacting, and then we can provide them feedback from analysis from the facial expressions on acknowledgement expressions, shaking, nodding, emotions, fear, calm, and so on. Extreme, what we call extreme emotions like crying and laughing. And we can detect those things automatically and provide the future doctors some feedback on their communication skills. We can also use physiology to understand emotions. So in this one, what you see on the top is the screen the student is seeing, and this is an intelligent tutoring system that teaches information technologies. And normally we don't plug students in Sydney this way. This is just a lab experiment. But it has sensor on his face for EMG. He has a respiration sensor as well. And we can detect emotions automatically from this. So when the person is writing, he will get confused at some point. At some point he might get bored. And we can adapt the intelligent tutoring system, the interaction, based on what this person feels. So if the person is bored, we can raise the challenge of the questions. If the person gets too stressed, we can lower the challenge or give more explanations. Sometimes I have colleagues that have worked in introducing confusion into the process because there is evidence that confusion can actually help learning. Now, cognition, behavior, and affect at the basis of experience. And if we have techniques that allow us to understand more about people's experiences, shouldn't we be using this for well-being? And this is how I came into studying what we call positive computing, technology for well-being. But there are many disciplines that have to come together to bring the basis for this, the foundations. And this includes, of course, psychology and neuroscience. There's a lot of different disciplines and approaches from computing, education and social sciences, particularly behavioral economics, and design, things like emotional design and architecture. All these different disciplines have something to bring to the field. I'm going to be telling you a little bit about only two of these, mostly psychology and then economics, and the work that they have been doing in those areas. So the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, DSM, and the CSD, the Center for Epidemiological Research Depression Scale, are probably the two most commonly used scales to measure depression, anxiety, mental illness. And the absence of mental illness in this clinical model means that you're doing well. If you're not depressed, that's good. That's exactly the definition of well-being. In fact, those scales, the CSD, the DSM, are considered so reliable that your insurance company is willing to pay if you have above a certain scale. And as you probably know, getting money from an insurance company is generally not very easy. So the scales there are very good, but the definition is something that people have questioned. And positive psychology is a movement that arose from critics to this way of understanding well-being, including Martin Seligman, Felicia Happert, and others. It focuses on looking at the factors that we can use to identify those people that are flourishing, that are at the top of the well-being scale. And then looking at how we can promote those factors amongst the population. Some of these factors will include things like socio-emotional intelligence, and there is a lot of studies looking into empathy, how we can understand our own emotions, how we can regulate our emotions, how we can understand other people's emotions, how we can use that in our interactions with other people. There is other theories like self-determination theory that take autonomy, competence, and connectedness as the essence of well-being, are the factors of well-being. Or we have approaches like the one that generally economists use that are subjective well-being. So rather than using factors like normally positive psychology uses, factors that come from researchers, are defined by researchers, we ask people, how are you doing? So we ask people for their own ideas of well-being. And this is what, for example, Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel Prize winner, has generally done on well-being. So Daniel Kahneman is generally better known for his work on decision theory, but has done pioneering work on well-being. And finally, we have neuroscience as a way of understanding well-being. And there are researchers like Richard Davidson, who has looked at how mindfulness training has an impact on our brains, and you can use those measures to understand more about well-being. So each of these theories have different factors. SDT, self-determination theory, has autonomy, connected, competence. Then we have meaning, or PERMA, that is the model by Seligman, mindfulness, and so on. As an engineer, I don't have a background to understand or to get into the details of all of this. So we have to work with psychologists, neuroscientists, etc. And sometimes we will combine some of these factors in different ways in our designs. So the other discipline that has contributed a lot to our understanding of well-being is behavioral economics. And economists in Europe and the UK in particular have been using these measures to influence decision-making and policy. So what you see there is a map of the United Kingdom, and they do a survey every 6 months where you can see the well-being of that area. And then they can look at how policy changes will have an impact on well-being. The World Happiness Report looks at the world level, the happiness levels in different countries. Then you have an European survey, the Eurobarometer, and so on. So these are government initiatives. In the US, it has been more organized by commercial organizations, and you have the Gallup Healthways, that is a daily survey of well-being across different regions in the US. So we have already a number of ways of measuring well-being. So experience utility is the work that Daniel Kahneman developed. Experience sampling are techniques that we often use to measure well-being using, most recently using mobile phones. And what we are seeing is that techniques like the ones I showed you from affective computing, where you can detect emotions automatically, can be used to make it easier to understand people's experiences while they are interacting with technology. Now, of course, here I'm talking about well-being promotion. Many people, and maybe some of you here, will be focused on the treatment of illness, of mental illness, and this is very important. But if we want to use technology to improve worldwide well-being, we need to focus on models of promotion. And this is an interesting diagram by Felicia Happer, where it shows that when we move the mean, it reduces the number of people that have a mental disorder and increases the number of people who are flourishing. So this is what we should be aiming for when we design technologies. I think this is where technologies can have the most impact. So I will let now Dorian speak about the different factors and how we can use them in design.
Hi, everybody. So I'm the designer, so I'm really interested in figuring out how we can move this amazing research into practice. Tackling the fairly nebulous notion of well-being is sort of a big ask. So one of the things we've done is gathered together a number of the factors that are considered, and actually there's a lot of evidence behind this, that are determinants of well-being, because it's in a sense a lot more operationalizable for designers like myself to be looking at the individual factors. So these are just a few examples, and they're drawn from different models of well-being. I'm going to look at a few of these and give you some examples of technologies that are already doing something about supporting these. So first of all, positive emotions. In a sense, that's an easy one to start with, because if there's anything there that designers already do, it's positive emotions, but it's very specific kinds of positive emotions. So we always talk about things like delight and fun, and I want it to feel good, and I want it to look good. And there's people actually doing some really interesting work in this area, but positive emotions are not all created equal. Right? I mean, gambling's not exactly the same thing as love, you know. So even though you can consider both experiences as including positive emotions, so personally, I'm really interested in looking at more deeply at positive emotions. And if you even think about them at a very basic level, I mean, with a very basic model that only differentiates them into these two categories, and these are categories used for compassion-focused therapy, and I have the citations here, but we have seeking-focused positive emotions associated with drive and excitement, and affiliative-focused positive emotions that are where compassion comes in, right, and connectedness, and contentment, and feelings of warmth, and feeling safe. And these apparently, the science tells us, have actually different emotion regulation systems in the brain. They are distinct. So if we think about and speculate around, where would we put our day-to-day technologies in these categories? And I, for one, have a heck of a lot easier time coming up with examples of the drive category. Okay, I'm going to hurry up, I'm going to catch up, I'm going to do some more. It's the productivity thing, whether it's email or the calendar, or me forming on Twitter, or combat simulation, all the games, or most of them that are out there, even Candy Crush, let's get another round in, you know. I'm striving, I'm reaching, I'm trying to achieve, I'm searching for information, I'm tracking my exercise, I'm gamifying. On the other hand, it's a little bit more difficult to think of examples, of course they're there, of experiences that digital technologies allow that encourage our affiliative side. So maybe texting playfully with somebody in my family, maybe doing a gratitude journal app, something dedicated, praising someone on Facebook. And I want to know how we can see more of the affiliative side of things. We're good at this, okay? For some reason or another. But I want to see more of the affiliative stuff. This is an interesting example because at first glance it's chess. Chess is about achievement. It's about striving. But what's going on the side here is that this is a game of chess being played by a 7-year-old boy and his grandfather. And they're about 10,000 miles away from each other. And while playing this game of chess on iPads, they're having a little chat. And they're slipping in little emotional content in there, things like, did you know you're my favorite grandson? And yes. And eventually later on, there's an I love you. And this is beautiful because I happen to know these two people because they're my son and his grandfather. And that I love you never happens face-to-face. So what was amazing is not only that they were able to have this interaction even though they were remote, but that it actually enabled something that wouldn't have happened he is his only grandson. It's not that he was being favoritist. That's right. Sorry, I should have thrown that in. So it's an affordance of the technology that's unique and uniquely positive and affiliative. But this is accidental. The people who designed the chess game were like, okay, our grandsons are going to play with their grandfathers and it's going to be affiliative. This is entirely serendipitous. But there are also more deliberate things that can be done. So I want to look at some of those as well. These are examples of technologies that are specifically designed to foster empathy. So in this case, we have two games. one in which you can play two sides, either the Israeli side or the Palestinian side, the president or the prime minister, and you make decisions and you see the consequences of those decisions, and they have real video and real photos because they've tried everything on both sides already, and that's quite an amazing experience. It's called the Peacemaker game. Then we also have this one, it's called the Frontiers game, and you could play the refugee fleeing from Africa into Europe or the border guard, the border patrol guard, and you do end up playing both sides. So this is an interesting capacity that technology has to allow for virtual role-playing in ways that we wouldn't be able to before. And then the other example here is actually a support in emotional intelligence and reading emotions, and it's intended for people on the Asperger's spectrum and to support autism. So there's a lot of ways that technology can support empathy in a dedicated way. But there's little ways too. So we're really familiar with like. But now I'm seeing a little bit more of appreciate this. And to me, there's a big difference there. Like is very much about me. It's about my preferences, my opinions. I like this. And appreciate this, I think at least, is much more gratitude. And it's more about you, less about me. So little differences, I think, can also start changing the shape of things in a more affiliative direction. Here's another example, and it's funny, I was talking about this with some people in our audience just now, but in terms of opportunities to give praise, like appreciation and kudos online, we have LinkedIn, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with LinkedIn, and they have this feature where you can endorse people you know for certain skills. The problem is they make it so easy that it becomes meaningless. So you go in and there's 5 different skills. Do you want to endorse this person for this? And Rafa has a great example because he's been endorsed for Microsoft Word. So that was useful. Yes. Whereas I have an opposing kind of experience where somebody went in there and made an effort to endorse me for caring. And I just was so touched because that was clearly not one of the obvious things that jumped up into the window. But the point is that the way this has been designed, they're forcing you to be fast and efficient and endorse as many people as you can. So you're really losing the benefit of the person giving the endorsement, that feeling of, oh, I really enjoy being able to say this nice thing about this person. It feels good, and then they feel good when they receive it. On the other hand, in Yammer, they've done it a little bit differently. When you want to praise somebody, you do a little sentence about why you're praising them. There's a bit more time involved. You have to think about it a little bit more. This is going to end up being more authentic, and the meaning is retained there. So here again, small design decisions that I think can make a noticeable difference. This one is interesting too. This is a product called Zenpayroll, and they are looking at what is generally considered drudgery, a really painful task. I've got to do payroll. And thinking, wait, hold back. Where's the meaning behind this? Actually, this is an opportunity. I'm giving to people. I'm rewarding them for the great work that they've done. And so they've framed it, I think, very appropriately as a celebration. And I like to be inspired by this idea that we can look at tasks that we've come to consider boring and drudgery and painful and etc., and look deeper, what's the meaning for us in this? What's the human meaning behind this? And then design to support that and bring that back into focus. Now, another example comes from games, because while we have the shooter games, as we all know, there's also pro-sociality in games. And the research shows that pro-social games can increase pro-social behavior in the real world. So there's much hope. There are actually a lot of great games out there. And there are examples in games of where you can give to other players, help other players, revive them, bring them back to life. This example here is when you have a farm in heyday. Your friends can click on your tree and revive your tree, and your tree comes beautifully back to life. And it's a lovely little thing. And just a similar example for if there's any obsessed people with Clash of Clans out there, I know you're out there somewhere, you can donate troops to other people in your clan, in your team, in your group, etc. Now, these are just little things, and they're virtual. They're not real. Do we have the same goodness feelings? Do we get the same benefits from being altruistic in a virtual world as in a real world? I don't know. This is an open area for research, but I'm really interested, and I think we probably get some percentage of that beneficial feeling, because when you're involved in the game world, it feels real. There's also ways that we can directly relate it to the real world. This is a game called Half the Sky. It's a Facebook app, and it's entirely about supporting and empowering women and girls all over the world, and especially in developing nations. And as you play through the game, and it is beautiful, it is fantastic, because it is dealing with really serious issues, AIDS, for example, in Africa, or just the daily struggles of life in some poor villages. And it's doing it in a way that is engaging and that feels very positive. And it's empowering for those who play it, not only because they're learning about lives elsewhere, outside of their normal sphere, but because as they go along, they can make real donations related to the activities they've just engaged in the game. So in the game, you might have had a quest to secure a certain number of books for a school, and then following that, you can buy currency or something that then gives those books in real life to people that are out there somewhere. So it's pretty interesting. Another thing I like to think about is how people hack their world. So the media absolutely bombards us with shocking atrocities, and it's fear-mongering, and if it bleeds, it leads, and it's anger, and this and that's really emotionally exhausting. It's also artificial in the sense that I don't think evolutionarily we were equipped for getting all of this at once. Let's pick everything of the worst things happening in the world and let you know about it all at once. So what I enjoy seeing is that people try to balance this out. This is how I look at it, by hacking their media environment and looking for the positive stories. And what you see going viral is the amazing homeless man who returned $40,000. And then over time, the people that then accrued another $200 in return for him, and now he has a house. Or the man that saved the bear cubs from the trash can. You get all these stories in your email and on YouTube, because people want to be inspired, and it helps balance out what's out there. Oh, I just messed up my slides. Sorry. So I'm almost there. This is the other example here. People hacking their world with cute cat videos and pictures. As much as we'd like to make fun of Lil Bub, what could be more conducive to contentment, warmth, and safety than a dwarf kitten? I really think we're coming back to the same thing, and it's people looking for affiliative experience even in their digital world. Plus humor. Humor's good. Now this is weird, I know. This may seem a bit contradictory, and I'm not saying that the zombie apocalypse makes you feel warm and cozy and contented, or safe or soothed, but I just want to point out that you got to keep your mind open, because there's inspiration to be found everywhere. And in a lot of these graphic narrative games, what you have is that the goal of the game isn't so much killing the zombies that is sprinkled around in there, but it's social consequences, it's socio-emotional skill that you have to put into practice. So here it says, Kenny appreciates your concern for Duck. So what you have just elected to do in the game has had a particular social consequence. And then the game tells you what happens, and what then occurs in the narrative will change depending on your decision. And I think that's really interesting, and I'm interested in how we could use more of this aspect in games and maybe elsewhere. And look everywhere, see, it's just back to that, don't close your mind off. Inspiration is everywhere. So the other thing that we have talked about, and recently we have a paper out about the idea of compassion versus empathy. And for me, it's really about compassion as resilience versus empathic distress. And it comes back to this notion of, if you're one of those people that can't look at the news because it's too overwhelming, that's distress, that's distressing. And that's not helpful, because that's the opposite of the approach behavior. Compassion allows you to approach the problem. It's a very healthy response in the sense that it benefits your health, your physical health, and it allows the problem to be solved, and it allows you to move to altruism. So for me, I'd love to see us better understand how technology can move us from a distress reaction to a compassionate, resilient reaction. And scanning the literature on compassion, amazing literature on compassion, we drew a few, let's say, speculative directions in which technology can go to reach this aim. So one thing is the idea of addressing appraisals of deservedness. So researchers know that people are less likely to shift into that compassionate state if they feel the person is not deserving of their compassion. So if, for example, somebody is homeless but you think, that's just because they don't try hard enough to get a job and it's a choice, then there's a deservedness thing there, and the shift to compassion is less likely to occur. So if we're creating a technology around that space, how can we address that issue, either by education or role-playing or what have you? Let your minds explore. Now, another thing we can look at is supporting feelings of agency. So there's this sense of helplessness with empathic distress. I can't do anything, it's too overwhelming. And there's a sense of empowerment with compassion. And that half the sky game for me is a beautiful example of designing for the empowered compassion. Because in the game, as I said, it deals with things very respectfully and with a lot of integrity, these serious issues, but not in a way that makes you want to run away. And it gives you actions you can take right there and then. It's a very empowering kind of thing. So that's something we can look at how we can do better. Another really good example of this is where you have charities and they either show a picture of something very devastating, like a starving child, which can be very overwhelming, or they show a picture of a community that has been helped by charitable donation, for example, like, oh, here's the well that now exists, that now has improved their lives. And it's interesting to think about the two approaches and how that changes your reaction to the situation. Oh, no, I didn't mean to do that yet. Now, providing opportunities for the practice of altruism is something I'll come back to, because there's a really cool study that has occurred here in Stanford that is a great example of that. But the point is that there is some evidence that if you practice altruism in a virtual world, that actually can transfer to the real world. So that's exciting. Providing opportunities for elevation relates back to the video. So elevation, what I mean by that is inspiration, awe, faith in humanity, looking at something wonderful that somebody else has done and feeling so fantastic about that and being moved to do something good yourself. And this is, I think, where people are finding those things themselves and looking for that kind of state. And finally, supporting compassion training practices. We've got heaps of evidence about how wonderful compassion training practices are out there that clearly foster compassion in people, compassionate states, and even trait over time. That is harder to implement with technology. Well, it comes down to dedicated kind of apps or training programs, but it's definitely worth pursuing as one of the things that technology can help us do. Now, the altruism example. So this is Jeremy Bailenson. He's down the road here at Stanford, and he's got a virtual reality lab, and some of you may already know about this, but they did this incredible experiment where they had people come in, and one group got to fly around like Superman in a virtual world and save a sick child and be the hero. Another group just flew around. Another group was in a helicopter just looking around. Then when these groups came out of the lab, they encountered somebody who needed help. And what was amazingly interesting was that some of the people of all the groups helped. All the people in the superhero condition helped. And they helped better, and they helped for longer. So this is beautiful, beautiful evidence of how our virtual experiences, they do affect us. We may call them virtual, but they have an impact on our emotional experience, and then that can transfer to the outside world. So I really look forward to further research in this direction. And if this is true, this is great news for people developing technologies, because that means we can be doing this and having positive effect. Now, how do we envision work in the future? Well, let's see. First of all, we currently look at positive computing technology that's out there as falling generally into one of these four categories. So first of all, the first category is not positive computing. It doesn't measure well-being or consider well-being specifically as an outcome of the technological experience. And then there's preventative integration, which is the idea that compromises to well-being, like it causes stress or it encourages trolling, or cyberbullying, would be considered almost errors that then trigger design iterations to correct for that. Okay, and that's kind of a really practical first place to start. What are the problems? How can we use the literature, the theory, what we know in the fields about psychology to repair that, to redesign in such a way that we remove that problem? Then we have a notion of active integration. This is where technology is designed proactively to support different components of well-being. And this obviously is the one that's going to take longest before we start to see these examples. Okay, so we have examples where Facebook is already doing preventative integration. So where they struggle with people reporting images that upset them, they are introducing interventions that can help with empathy, for example. This next section is going to take longer, but we envision things like a Microsoft Word designed to support flow, like social media that's designed to support social intelligence, that's designed to foster emotional intelligence. That doesn't seem crazy. That's where we should be heading. And finally, this last category is actually quite large and growing every day. It's the dedicated technologies that are purpose-built to foster a specific aspect of well-being, like whether it's a mindfulness app or the well-being support tools and things like that. It's encouraging to see that there's a lot of interest in that particular area at this time. Here is just, it happens to be the framework that we talk about more in the book, but this is intended to help practitioners, designers like myself, engineers, our biggest concern is that we really want people to make sure their work is evidence-based. Okay, because it'd be really easy to pick up a pop psychology book and go, yeah, I want to build a technology on this, and there's a big risk there, because if you're not a psychologist, you're not working with psychologists, and you're not working off evidence-based stuff, you could have the best intentions in the world and you might be doing harm. So for us, we are big on multidisciplinary collaboration. We think that psychologists and psychiatrists and everybody in the mind sciences need to be at the helm of projects like this, and social scientists as well. So this is intended to help technologists and practitioners identify some of the theories that have a lot of evidence behind them and some of the strategies that have been proven to already increase the factors of well-being, and so they get started on the right foot. Now, this just happens to be a list of some of the incredible multidisciplinary experts that we have that have provided their expert opinions about how technology can support well-being in the book. Because we really want to push the multidisciplinary thing, we made sure to get perspectives from people in all sorts of different areas like design and neuroscience and social science and etc. And I know I'm taking too long. Is this the cue that I'm getting? Okay, fine. How much time do I have? Okay. So these are just some of the projects we're working on. This one's called Moderator Assistant, and the idea here is to help those who help others. We work with an organization called reachout.com, and they help youth with mental health issues, and they have moderators that actually respond to posts that people put up that can be that can identify people at risk. And so I hate myself, my body, my life. These are actually real posts in the Facebook group, and we want to help them handle these things better. So what we've done is we have a system that basically can triage the posts automatically, those which relate to self-harm, that which relates to depression, so they can very quickly see what needs urgent attention. And we help them also to respond in a way that's more robust. So they're volunteers, they're not professional psychologists or something like that. So we have professional psychologists create content that's specific to different types of problems, and we include resources that can help those people, and then they are provided with these templates and they rewrite them and change them and personalize them and whatever it is, and this makes their responses more effective and makes it easier for them to reply to more people. But also critically, because we take a positive computing approach, we want to support them and we want to support their resilience, because doing this job is hard. You have to read a lot of difficult things. And to keep them going, we know it's going to help if they see that what they're doing matters. So what we then do is give them feedback for the people that read the posts that you replied to them, how many then clicked on the links and went to the resources? How many people stayed with the post for a certain amount of time? So we can give them feedback on the fact that what they're doing has had effect, has had impact, which is generally something very difficult to see for people working in that position. Another project, we have two projects actually, where we're looking at adolescents moving from pediatric care into being adults and having to manage their own health care. So for us, there's practical aspects to this, but more importantly for us, it's about autonomy. So it's not just we're going to remind you when to take your medicine. It's like, how can we build your ability to remember yourself and to manage your own health care? I'm hurrying. Finally, we have a Men at Work project, which is funded by Movember. Some of you may be familiar with the mustache thing where, people raise money for men's health. Well, this is looking at male-dominated workplaces where you have people find it very difficult, men find it more difficult to seek help when they have mental health problems. So trying to figure out how to help them, and our approach is very much one of leveraging compassion, because while these guys have no interest in helping themselves, they're really interested in helping other people. So by approaching them and saying to the firefighters, for example, we can offer you skills and ways of helping people prevent PTSD, or helping people in the community, the psychological support skills, then that's also going to end up helping them as well. So that's in the process. We can let you know more later about that if you're interested. We have a fellowship thing. What we're doing right now is just trying to understand better about positive computing and how to measure it and how to define design strategies that can help everybody work towards it. But that's too much to do because we're out of time. We do some workshops. If you're interested, you can ask us. Conclusions. Technology changes us. It does. We know this now for a fact. There are psychological factors that are known to increase well-being, and these factors can be used to inform the design of technologies that better support and foster aspects of well-being. So positive computing is providing a framework to support this effort by insisting and drawing on multidisciplinary work and theoretical frameworks to serve as an evidence base, and by helping practitioners manage design for well-being by addressing those determinants, those factors, and by targeting promotion, because we want to see all technology support flourishing. That is all. Thank you. Do you want to come up, or we can take questions now, I believe.
Is there a relationship between that happiness feeling that can be induced with the technology and the quality of learning, the effectiveness of learning that also people are exposed to when they use technology?
The effectiveness of learning in general? There's definitely, he's asking about, is there a link between induced happiness and learning? There's definitely a link between happiness and learning in that positive states are more likely to increase creativity. And I actually, I've done some work specifically to learning, so it's interesting that you asked that question. So that's not to say that you should only ever be super happy when you're trying to learn something, but possibly most of the time that's going to help you to think more broadly and to be more creative. So there is evidence for that.
If you look in the website and you're interested in learning technologies, Dorian has a book as well on this topic, on interface design for learning. So, yes.
In the superhero experiment,
Yeah.
did the two superheroes, one helped a child and the other just flew, were they the same in pro-social behavior following?
They actually was more of an effect when they helped the child. Yeah.
How do you design to avoid abuse? So some of the dopaminergic happiness technologies, are susceptible to overuse and cause you to become kind of addicted to this dopamine surge.
Yeah.
Are the same? How do you do?
It's a really great question, and I want to point you to there was a recent paper that actually showed self-compassion can have some antidotal effects to internet addiction. And I thought that was really interesting, because for me that is a suggestion that maybe some of these affiliative emotions are actually can calm that striving addictive side. Now, I haven't proven this with any research yet, but I think that particular paper is hinting in that direction. And it'll be interesting to see research going forward what unearths there, but I think that's a really important area. Did you want to add something to that? Sorry.
I wanted to add, so do you think that it is possible, though, for affiliative, I guess, positive emotions to become addictive as well?
Oh, I don't, but I would turn that to somebody like Jim.
Well, I mean, if the answer is yes, is that bad?
Right. Right. Do I need to worry if it is?
We know that when someone sees somebody doing a compassionate act, they're much more likely to act compassionately. We know that when a person acts compassionately, they have a higher level of meaning and satisfaction. And frankly, the whole reason why we exist is to hopefully figure out ways to make you addicted to be kind.
Yeah. And I mean, it's great. I would speculate that if you are addicted to kindness and compassion, it's not an addiction that blocks you out from the world. So I think generally when it comes to addiction, it's about things that ruin our relationships and close us off from the world, and we're very narrow. Whereas any of those affiliative emotions are completely about approach and about connecting with others. So maybe it's about how we frame our definition of addiction.
Yeah, and I just a comment, there's actually a talk I gave at Wisdom 2.0 a few years ago that talks about, transformation, what I call transformation versus transcendence. Sometimes we talk about mindfulness, and they're type A, sort of obsessive type people, and without sort of a compassion component, that type of behavior can be very addictive, and it ends up isolating you more. But when you actually sort of have this transcendence, when it's not about self, it's about others, this is really what gives you meaning, and that moving outward to focus on others gives one great meaning, and it makes you feel good, and it decreases depression, and so I think that's what we strive for. Addiction, I think by what you're just commenting, is a negative connotation, but if you were to say being addicted to being kind to people, no one would say that was a bad act. But there is a book called Pathological Altruism. Have any of you read that book?
Wow. No.
Well, this is when people get fixated on what they think is good,
Okay.
but it's what they think is good. That's not necessarily what others think is good, and that's one type, because they're getting this self-gratifying benefit from doing this act, but actually the act could potentially be destructive to other people. So.
So, first of all, thank you both for an excellent and informative presentation and for some great work. And you needn't have felt rushed because this is SelfCare, so it's all compassionate.
We got to get him fed, all right? That's the problem.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. That's
No,
right.
she's not talking to me. She's texting me, say, don't come home.
So I was wondering, could you give us an example of some thoughts you have for how you might make Word, modify it to induce or sustain flow? I noticed on one of your slides.
Well, does that little example is a change they've already made, which is the, what's it called, Focus View? And WordPress also has something that's equivalent, and that's something like pay attention or something. I can't remember what it's called right now. But you can elect to change the interface to allow you to not be distracted by things on the outside and to be able to allow you to better focus on what you're doing. And there's all these apps coming up and external services that provide this because people are increasingly wanting it in an overly distracted, multitask-focused kind of a world. So I think that's a small answer, but we just have to keep digging and thinking really creatively to figure out how we're going to do this, because this isn't what we've been doing in the past, but I do believe we can. Yeah.
I think we talked about this a little bit in Australia, but one of the challenges I think of designing these apps is, on the one hand, they have to be sticky.
Yeah.
How do you make them sticky to get people to come back? Well, that requires, frankly, at least initially, some sort of gamification, which requires sort of this dopaminergic type of aspect to it, and but so far, I don't think there are many sticky apps that are dedicated to this whole positive. Can you think of any? Headspace seems to be popular, and there seem to have a fair number of people. I don't know long term, but
I think there are a number of business models. It's interesting. The talks that we have given here in San Francisco, we always get questions about in a way, it's the business model, right? Because what you're saying is, how can I get the application to be used enough so I can make it work, sustainable?
I think there are a lot of things we do that aren't sticky in the dopaminergic sense. I mean, we repeatedly go out with friends, and presumably that's for affiliative reasons, and not so much because we're getting contingent rewards, hopefully, I don't know. Yeah, well, it depends on who you are. Or all the things that we get rewarded for in those affiliative ways, because we find them rewarding and meaningful, and that way we come back to it, I think it's just there's very few examples of that thus far in technology, but I think where that increases, we're going to be going back to those without needing the addictive drive side. At least I'm hoping, yeah.
I think also sometimes designing for with an expiration date on mind is very important. So in the projects that we are helping, because it's transition made, we're helping young people move from pediatric care to adult care. We don't want the application, the person to become dependent on that application. We want them to use it for a little while and then not need it anymore. So sometimes we have to design for the day that the person won't use it. So I think hopefully we can make it stick enough for a little while, but knowing and actually wanting the person to stop using it in a relatively short period of time, because they don't need it anymore.
Maybe it is a question of diminishing stickiness.
Yeah. It has to be really sticky.
Yeah, and then less and less.
I think also there are many applications where we are stuck even if we don't want to. And workplace technologies is a good example. So we have to work, and we have technologies in the workplace. So we could bring well-being into the workplace technologies. And I think that's something that it's increasingly becoming important in many countries. In the UK and Europe, where companies are liable, for example, for mental illness caused at the workplace, companies need to show that they are taking into account mental health. So they need to reduce workers' comp in the same way that the company has to pay when you break a leg in the workplace. If you have burnout, if you start suffering depression, anxiety because the workplace. And that change in the law means that companies need to include this in the technologies. In the technologies that we're already stuck with in the workplace that we have to use.
You know, it's interesting, you showed the slide which was of, I assume, a camera that was doing this on-the-fly dynamic analysis. I wonder, and it probably already exists or is being done, where actually you could actually have that on your computer. It's actually telling you your degree of anxiety or stress or non-engagement, and then it says pause. You need to go outside and see nature or whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, the technology is there. I haven't seen any product that does it in that particular way, but we could. Sometimes the concerns that come up are sometimes related to privacy and so on.
But if it's all happening on your own computer.
Yeah, you will have to.
Plus, I think it's, you know, if you have it as you opt in,
Right.
and you show an amount of data that says, you know, we have studied this group of people by having this on the fly, and we see this huge increase, you know.
That's right.
Then I think a lot of people would sign in, and it becomes something that's there, but.
There's already companies that are selling sensors that you can wear. They can give you information on levels of stress during the day. So you wear the sensor, uses skin conductance, and the information goes to a website and it's analyzed and tells you, oh, you know, you got really stressed in the morning, and then you can reflect on why that happened, etc. So it's kind of oriented to that, but without the computer vision side.
Yeah, there's another one, I don't know if you've seen it, and a fellow actually from Stanford who we've been involved with creates something called Spire. Have any of you heard of that?
I have.
So, does anybody have one? So you attach it to either your waist or on your bra. What it does is it monitors your breathing, and it has various accelerometers on it, and it actually tells you if you're calm, if you're focused, and it also acts as a pedometer, if you will, to tell you the amount of exercise. And it seems to work quite well.
Fantastic.
One big question is you're into artificial intelligence. And we know that in developed countries like Japan, they develop artificial intelligence in the form of robots, wherein, you know, they could be maids,
Yeah.
grandmother, or a babysitter, something like that. Do you think that through the advancement of artificial intelligence, connectiveness and empathy will be lost in this world in the future?
You can take that one.
Thank you. It's a good question. I think artificial intelligence or automation in general. So what we're trying to do with automation is improve generally productivity, reduce workload. And many people believe that if we put more robots around, we will have less work to do, and then we will have more time to spend in things that we enjoy. So if you believe on that, the argument goes, well, I will have less to do, I have more time to spend with friends and enjoy my time, and that will improve connectedness. On the other hand, you could say, well, if I'm interacting more with the robot, that means I have less time to spend with humans. If I'm interacting more with robots, it means that affects the way that I interact with the world in general. And that reduces connectedness. So I think it depends on how you develop the robot, really. If you develop a babysitter, the baby will start learning how to connect better with the robot than with other humans. So, yeah, that could have negative consequences, but you could design a robot that does other functions, leaving the things that are core to human nature to humans. I think we are to a point where we need to really ask ourselves, what is the essence of humanity? What do we want machines to do? What do we want humans to do? And leave robots to the things that are for robots, and leave humans to the things that make us human. And I think that's why I think compassion, altruism are essential things that only humans should have, and we should be designing to promote those. We shouldn't be caring about including this in robots.
There's somebody in the back that's had his hand up. I feel it's going to fall off. I feel bad.
Your thoughts about the measurement side of how effective the compassionate designs are. I mean, for things to be adopted in kind of a metric-y world. I'm sure there's a dashboard at LinkedIn where someone's really happy that like all these, hey, you're good at Word, these easy things keeps going up. And I was left wondering, do you guys have some thoughts about how we might approach assessing the compassion side, and how do we know when we have a design that's better or worse, particularly at scale?
Well, measuring compassion is a complicated thing. Maybe Jim has a lot more experience.
Well, and that's the thing. What is it that you're using? It's more probably of what is the correlate of compassion versus actually measuring compassion. Is it improved sense of well-being? Is it decreased levels of cortisol? Is it decrease in skin conductance? Is it there are all sorts of different ways you can measure that, and they're not all are directly related to compassion per se. So I think you have to be very careful about exactly what question. And some people argue we actually don't have a direct way to measure compassion yet. I think it's sort of like obscenity. I can't really define it or measure it, but I know when I see it. In some ways, I think it's that way. So we're still in the early stages of understanding this. I think we're getting a hint of what is possible. I think all of us intuitively believe, and I think there is a body of evidence that supports that these types of actions where you go outside yourself to be of service to others by nominally decreasing their suffering are very much of benefit physiologically. And then you can look at why, because there's probably an evolutionary imperative that made that so, and we're sort of geared that way. And I think, that's just the way we are.
I think the same techniques that we show here from affective computing once we understand what the construct is, you can use some of those techniques. In the same way you recognize emotions from facial expressions, from physiology, etc. Eventually, if you understand the construct, then you can start using those same technologies. That is basically what Jamie is saying. Looking at the physiology, looking at facial expressions, looking at behavior, and so on.
And behavior is probably better because I think you said especially at scale, and it's hard to take everybody up physiologically. But I think we have to get really creative in the way that people have to do often in the social sciences, and sometimes when they expose people to experimental situations, they then look at a behavior to follow or set up a very small behavior to follow that can indicate whether they're going in a more pro-social or a more anti-social direction. So I think we have to get creative about how we can do that within our own technologies, just to test that out, in addition to, of course, lab testing or Turk or whatever other methods that we use. But A/B testing based on this, we usually just point people to the scales that are in psychology for each of these factors, whether it's the empathy you're looking at or the thing, and then figure out how to integrate that. It's an ongoing challenge, but I think we can begin to do it if we're creative.
One thing you're pointing out I think is very exciting is this idea of evidence-based with these interventions, and you brought two examples kind of implicitly in this talk of accidentally building in stickiness, which can cause an addiction, or accidentally building like Eliza, the original AI computer, was shut down because it was inviting the computer to act like your friend and say, I care about you, when a human should do that. And so you brought up in the talk kind of this guidance framework, and I think it's really interesting. I'd like to hear more about maybe what your concerns are and any ideas you have of how to maybe vet or set up a framework or even a dialogue around being able to understand you've accidentally created something that seemed great but is actually hurting people. It's kind of, we're all kind of in this fuzzy world, but it'd be great to bring more structure around that, especially when you're in this weird hybrid of entrepreneurial with academic collaboration, where both are kind of maybe neutral on the topic. One's kind of investigating, trying to do novel things. The other one's trying to go to market. So who's going to govern, or is there could be govern that?
In terms of governance, I'm not sure, but I think it's definitely about literally measuring for well-being related impact with the scales that have been validated. So there's no reason you can't take those post technological experience. It's just that you have to be aware that there's a time scale issue, and that ideally you're testing not just immediately after, but also maybe a week, maybe 6 months even, which is hard in this fast-paced world, but working towards that is I think, part of the solution. But what were you going to say?
Yeah, I think when you're developing software for mental health, we will increasingly be requiring to follow the same type of legislations that have been applied in medicine. So in Australia in particular, if you're building an app that will have an effect on a person, it can be considered or would be considered a medical device. So you would need to get the equivalent of an FDA approval. So that means that you require testing evaluations that are similar to the ones that you will use in a medical device, in a medical application. And that means that entrepreneurs will have to start working more closely with people that knows about evaluation methodologies, in the same way that big pharma has people that are experts on that type of thing. So with time, we will start improving the evidence we have on which applications work, which designs work, and so on. The question was about using sensors to improve well-being in a way, and biochemistry, etc. There's a whole field called quantified self or personal informatics. Quantified self or personal informatics. They are looking into how measuring everything from the steps you walk, the miles you run, etc., can be used to build tools for reflection that eventually improve well-being. And I think there's fantastic work in that area. On the other hand, I think we need to learn better when you will be designing it and for what kind of people, because also measuring, judging, comparing can have a negative impact. So if you collect signals for physiological signals or behavioral signals, and people start using it to compare with other people, it can have negative consequences. So, but there is a lot of very interesting work around that area. So if you look for quantify self, that might be.
It's not a website, but just as an example of the kind of physiological monitoring, I just purchased recently a device called S Plus from ResMed that monitors your sleep, and it really does help you, gives you information on how to improve your sleep, tells you how much REM you got, how much deep sleep, how much light sleep, and you can score every day, and you can plot it, and you can see what you're doing, and ask you questions about your stress level, your alcohol intake, and all these other questions, and it gives you all this feedback to say, oh, okay, if I change these behaviors, then my sleep improves.
I like that you mentioned ResMed, an Australian company. But yes, that's one, and there are many other products that are being used to track sleep patterns. I haven't tried that one in particular. There's even other ones that you can use. Just put your mobile phone under the pillow, and that gives you a sense on how well you're sleeping. Having said that, again, we have to be careful, because if I put my mobile phone under my pillow, personally, I will find it hard, because then the first thing I do in the morning, the tendency will be to read my email and blah, blah, blah. So I have learned over time that the best thing I can do is leave my phone downstairs. But some designs, like I used to wear a Samsung version, basically, of a tracker, and my Samsung watch wanted to be next to my Samsung phone. And when I went far away, he would shout, like vibrate. So it wasn't a good idea, because I had the practice of leaving the phone downstairs. So there are some very subtle differences in the design of the technology that can change your behavior in ways that you hadn't expected. And that's the type of things that we need to become more careful about.
That's machine-affiliated behavior.
Yes.
I think we have maybe time for one more question.
I just want to go back to the mystery of compassion. Years ago, I heard a very famous psychiatrist from the VA speak here at Stanford, and he had dedicated his whole life to treating veterans. And he said, in post-war, that just all of them who've survived have this survivor guilt and punish themselves, like, why couldn't they do more? Why couldn't they save their buddy? And why are they alive? And why couldn't they do more? And I wondered about that. And it seems to be related to compassion or some sort of sense of oneness, that we are not aware that we have. And I wonder if any of this could be back engineered. I mean, there's so many vets these days suffering from post-PTSD, and I just was wondering if their situation could be back engineered to have some compassion, healing, or have them understand more about why they feel that way in a positive sense.
Well, I think the research on, sorry, I should let you take that, but on self-compassion is incredibly interesting here. And it includes an aspect where you actually contemplate the connectedness and universality of our position in the world. And self-compassion is really, practices are proved to be very genuinely healing for people that have that shame that you're talking about in very deep ways. So I would definitely look into that if that's an area of interest. And I'm certainly interested in how can technology support things like that as well. Because as I said before, there's also some evidence that helps with internet addiction and these other kinds of things that we have problems with in technology. But I'll turn to Jim.
I was going to say, one of the problems with post-traumatic stress disorder, and survivor's guilt is not necessarily post-traumatic stress disorder, that's a slightly different issue, but post-traumatic stress disorder is a memory integration issue. But we have a compassion cultivation training, which has, at least preliminary data, shows it is beneficial in that context. And there's an ever increasing amount of evidence that certain types of psychedelics may have a significant impact, like MDMA and others, on post-traumatic stress disorder or reorganizing memories.
What was the kind of training you said?
Compassion cultivation training. Okay. So we have developed at SelfCare a specific program that increases one's compassion, and by doing so, not only addresses the issue of self-compassion, but educates and informs on how you can actually give compassion to others, because one of the barriers is actually some people have fear of actually giving compassion and also accepting compassion. And these types of trainings, and Paul Gilbert's work also address this issue as well.
It's a very short, yeah.
Okay. With the sort of word processing and flow, there's actually sort of programs like OmWriter and WriteRoom, which sort of are designed to sort of encourage these sorts of sort of flow states in writing. One of the things that's really interesting about them, though, which gets to a question of sort of intent, is that levels of satisfaction with these go up when you have things like essentially little messages that encourage, sort of say goodbye to your monkey mind when you sort of fire up OmWriter, for example. With WriteRoom, satisfaction levels went up when they started charging people for the software, when it went from being freeware to being something you charge, because sort of it underlined for users the degree of commitment that they were making to sort of developing a practice. And so this, and sort of the various studies that you had, that you had, went kind of back and forth on the degree to which you can essentially manipulate people into being more compassionate versus the degree to which they have to actively want to be, right? Sort of the Superman example, no one, that's a great unconscious example. But sort of how far do you think you can get in sort of encouraging resilience, altruism, and so forth, without people being aware of it, or maybe with them resisting, versus having to sort of have them be conscious of what's going on?
There was a study that was done that showed that in women over the age of 65, as an example, who did volunteer work, that if they did it purely out of altruistic intent, that they received the benefits in terms of longevity, which is a manifestation of feeling good and your physiology working well. And the group of people in the self-report study who actually did not receive the benefit were people who were inauthentic, if you will, who they wanted to receive a reward or had some other non-authentic desire or a non-sincere desire, so they didn't receive the benefit. So in some ways that answers that question. It does have to be authentic in terms of this issue of, well, if they paid more, that showed more commitment. I'm not sure if that is actually true. As an example, there's a study that was done where people were given wine that was cheap and wine that was expensive. And they're the same wine, yet even experts said that the expensive wine just was so great. And so when if something has a perception of having no value, because you're not paying for it in some manner, you're not suffering for it, then you don't attribute value to it, and you can't get benefit from it. So you can unconsciously create value that has positive effect on you. So, and these are really challenges, some of the issues of, like you're saying, fooling yourself. Are you fooling yourself? Are you filled with delusion, using some Buddhist terminology? Are you seen with clarity? Do you have correct intent? And all of these are issues that have to be addressed into it, or at least you have to have self-awareness of it. And I won't say anymore, okay?
Well, I was going to say almost the exact same thing. No. The only thing I would add to that is that I think it has to be two-pronged. And I think there's an element to which we can think about it as psychoergonomics. There's a lot we can do to help people help themselves with their health by having the banana at reach instead of the Coca-Cola or whatever it is, or having the space in which they reside help them to be healthier instead of fighting it, right? And I think we should be doing that with technology. We should feel better, not despite technology or in spite of it, but because of it, because it's helping us. And that's well-being, and I think that's for compassion as well. But yeah, you're not going to turn some evil person into a compassionate person by accident or without their knowledge. To get to that level, they'll have to engage more deeply with it, I think. I would speculate. Did you want to? Okay.
No, I will just repeat exactly what they said. So.
I was going to say something incredibly profound, but I can't right now. Well, listen, I appreciate all of you coming. I hope this conversation was informative. It certainly was to me. And thank you again for supporting us. And may the, something be with you. I won't say God. So may the force be with
Peace
you.
and force.
The positive force. So, and be compassionate. Thank you.